The Buffalo Bills traded away Stefon Diggs for a second-round pick. But are the Buffalo Bills actually screwed? Today, let's talk about the Buffalo Bills and why I think their future isn't as dark as what many people are making it out to be. Now, let me make this abundantly clear. Losing Stefon Diggs on a team that already didn't have the greatest receiving core is a major loss. However, I feel like it was a necessary loss for this team. Getting a second-round pick in return for Stefon Diggs was actually pretty good value for the Buffalo Bills, given the fact that Keenan Allen didn't even go for that, and arguably, at this stage in his career, Keenan Allen is just as good, if not better, than Stefon Diggs. Now, if you want to know my opinion of this trade for the Houston Texans, I made a video about it just a few days ago, so go ahead and check that out after this video. But my mindset about why the Buffalo Bills did this is, well, they kind of had to. Stefon Diggs was a bit of a nuisance off the field and caused them a ton of off-the-field problems. And his production on the field was great and it was worth the off-the-field struggles. However, with this team not having the greatest chance of winning a Super Bowl next year, you might as well get everything you can out of him to sort of hit the small reset button. And that is going to be a common theme throughout today's video. The Buffalo Bills hitting the reset button. Trading away Stefon Diggs to get a second-round pick was definitely a part of that equation. I like the move a lot for the Houston Texans, and for the Buffalo Bills, as I mentioned, it was a necessary issue that they had to get rid of. So for the Buffalo Bills, getting a second-round pick, losing Stefon Diggs, I think it was worth it. I give the trade for the Buffalo Bills a B-. Obviously, losing a guy who's going to get you a continuous 1,000-yard season after another is always going to be a massive blow. But given the fact that it seems like his relationship with the front office and his relationship with Josh Allen has dwindled, it does make sense that both sides just need to move on for the betterment of not only the team, but also for Stefon Diggs' career. But outside of the Stefon Diggs trade, there have been a lot of moves this Buffalo Bills team has been doing this offseason, including losing out on a ton of really good players. So let's go ahead and talk about their free agency. Let us begin by talking about the players that they lost in this last free agency cycle, starting off with Gabriel Davis, who went to the Jacksonville Jaguars on a 3-year, $39 million deal. As bad as Gabe Davis was last year, and as disappointing as he has been throughout some points of his career, he still was a very solid wide receiver 2/3 for the Buffalo Bills. Losing out on him was something that I predicted, and I think 90% of us predicted, but it still kind of sucks. Gabe Davis had really good continuity with Josh Allen and was a big-time playmaker at certain games and in certain points of the season. However, I understand not wanting to pay him $13 million per year, so I don't blame them for that move at all. Then they lost out on Leonard Floyd, who has been a productive edge rusher for them. When you're paying Von Miller as much as you're paying him, it's going to be very hard to keep a lot of your edge rushers. Fortunately for them, they were able to keep one of their better edge rushers and actually got him on a better deal than Leonard Floyd, so I'm okay with them losing out on Leonard Floyd as well. Losing Mitch Morse, in my opinion, is probably the biggest loss of the offseason. He's a very good center and had very good chemistry and continuity with Josh Allen. I don't think I can understate how important the center position is, especially for a quarterback. Then they obviously cut Tre'Davious White, an older cornerback who suffered some injury problems. Again, it was kind of a necessary thing for them to do. They kind of had to do it. They got to get younger. Tre'Davious White, almost 30 years of age, getting paid $8 million for 1 year with the LA Rams. It was a necessary thing they had to do. Then they lost out on some guys like Dane Jackson, Tim Settle, Tyrell Dodson, Jordan Poyer, and a bunch of other guys as well. Of those guys, I think the biggest loss here, Dane Jackson was a good depth option at the cornerback position, so that one definitely does suck, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. It's not the end of the world by any means. Tyrell Dodson, to me, is one of their biggest losses, though. A cheap, very good quality rotational linebacker who this team is desperately going to miss. After this Bills team suffered a ton of injuries last year, Tyrell Dodson stepped up and played a pretty pivotal role on this defense last year, and so obviously get rid of him and get nothing in return is a kind of a big bummer. The other thing this team went through is losing both their safeties in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Now, as of this moment, Micah Hyde has not signed with another team, but I do imagine he's going to get signed any given day now. So we'll just kind of have to wait to see on that one. But now let's talk about what players they actually got, because I think they did a decent job of figuring out a lot of their problems. The biggest transaction they made this offseason was getting Curtis Samuel on a 3-year, $24 million deal. He's going to be your wide receiver 1, likely to start the year off, but I think once whoever comes in to be that wide receiver 1 at some point will take over his role, and he's going to be the wide receiver 2. Again, we'll talk about the wide receiver position because it is a huge need after losing Stefon Diggs. They brought in Mitchell Trubisky to be their backup quarterback on a 2-year, $5.25 million deal. Nothing really to talk about there. If Josh Allen goes down, your season's screwed because Mitchell Trubisky is not a very good quarterback. They brought in Will Clapp, who's going to be their backup / potential starting center at some point this year. He signed a 1-year, $1 million deal, so nothing too much to talk about there. But outside of that, nothing really too massive. Again, you brought in guys like Nicholas Morrow, Austin Johnson, Mike Edwards, Deshaun Williams. Those are all decent players, but hopefully none of those guys have to get a ton of playing time. Hopefully they're just depth options for this team. But now I want to start talking about some other things. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then lastly, I decided to do 3 mock drafts, all of them with the Buffalo Bills and all of them through 4 rounds, so we're gonna get to that at the very end of the video. Let's go ahead and discuss the goods of this Buffalo Bills team, and I think they're pretty obvious. The number one good, you have your quarterback situation figured out. You got Josh Allen, the second, maybe the best quarterback in the NFL besides Patrick Mahomes. He's proven to be a winner, and yes, he's never won the championship and never beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. Can't blame him. It's not his fault. He's played really freaking well in those games. And I think given where this team's direction is going, to at least have a young quarterback who's going to be for that team or who's going to be with that team for many years to come has got to be a bit of a soothing feeling for this Bills roster. The next good is, of course, going to be James Cook, their young running back who last year played pretty damn well. Is James Cook going to be a 3-down back for this roster? Probably next year he will be. I wouldn't mind seeing this team go out there and draft a running back at some point to be a traditional running back who could complement James Cook's abilities quite nicely. But once James Cook got going last year, it was pretty impressive to watch. So I think James Cook does have a very bright future with this roster. Then you have their slot wide receiver Khalil Shakir. In his second year in the NFL, he had a big time jump from his first year. Last year, he had 45 targets with 39 receptions, 611 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and really started to come on later in the season once his role got expanded. We're talking about a guy who was a 5th-round pick and looks to be their long-term answer at that slot receiver position. You put him next to Curtis Samuel and hopefully a wide receiver 1 at some point. I kind of like that receiving core for Josh Allen. Speaking of receiving core, you got to talk about Dalton Kincaid. The Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid companionship is actually very nice, with Dawson Knox being more of your traditional run blocking and do-it-all tight end, with Dalton Kincaid being more of your receiving option guy. Dalton Kincaid last year in his rookie year had a fantastic year. He had 673 yards, 2 touchdowns, and I imagine next year his role is going to get expanded even more. Then looking at this offensive line, you have your left tackle and your right guard and your right tackle spot for the most part figured out. Dion Dawkins just got paid a massive bag, so good for him. I think his career with the Buffalo Bills has been very successful. O'Cyrus Torrence had a up and down rookie year, but for the most part a lot of really high moments. He is going to be somewhere along your offensive line and answer for the long-term future. Spencer Brown is going to be your answer at the right tackle for next year, and barring any injuries. He's solid. He gets the job done, but I don't also want to take it off the table of eventually replacing him with somebody better, but for now, you're okay with that. Looking on this defense, Matt Milano will return next year, and that's obviously a big plus. And Ed Oliver is obviously your big name guy up the middle. He is a star. Is he up there with the guys like a Dexter Lawrence or a Christian Wilkins? No, but he's definitely like a small step below those guys. But outside of that, I hate to say it, there's not a lot of really great things about this defense. Offensively, I think it gets the job done. Defensively, there's a lot more questions than answers in my opinion. But now let's go ahead and move on to the bads. And as I alluded to, a lot of the bads are going to be on this defense. Starting off with the biggest bad of them all, Von Miller. And I hate to say this, but he is totally not worth the contract, even in the slightest. Last year, Von Miller suffered through a lot of injuries, but even when he was playing, he was horrible. Ending the year off with 0 sacks, 3 total tackles, and basically just nothing else on the stat board. I think it's pretty safe to say that it was a very disappointing year last year for Von Miller. Again, there are some injuries that we do have to take into account, but again, just disappointing. And even if you want to go back the year prior to this, when he was playing another 12-game season, he only had 8 sacks. And since 2021, he's only put together a combined 13 sacks. And we're talking about a guy who's getting paid pretty damn nicely. So if you're the Buffalo Bills team, I wouldn't be shocked if at some point you end up cutting him. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year, especially if the production does not come back, which I'll be honest with you, I don't think it is. Then there's a ton of question marks at the safety position. Currently, your 2 starters at safeties are Mike Edwards and Taylor Rapp, and you could also throw Damar Hamlin in there as well. But I don't know about you guys, that does not inspire me in the slightest. Taylor Rapp is decent. He's about as league average as you get at that safety position, but when you pair him up with a Mike Edwards, that is a very concerning duo at that safety spot. Could you potentially move a Kaiir Elam to safety? Maybe. I definitely want to keep that on the board here. But in a draft where there's not a ton of very good safety prospects out there, it's going to be very tricky to see how this team addresses that safety spot. When you've had a safety duo of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and now your safety duo is Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards, that is a massive downgrade, despite the fact that those guys are younger than what you previously had. Again, the draft class is not very strong at the safety position, so they're going to have a hard time fixing those problems out, especially especially with them not even having a third-round pick. The next big bad on this team is going to be just their general age. This is not a very young roster. There's not a lot of young guys on here. Fortunately for them, offensively speaking, they are relatively young. Khalil Shakir, second-year player. James Cook, second-year player. Josh Allen's relatively young. Osiris Torrance and Dalton Kincaid were both rookies last year. But if you look at the rest of the roster, it's a pretty old group of guys. Defensively, it is really bad with a lot of very old players like Von Miller, Matt Milano, Rasul Douglas, and so on and so forth. I could definitely see this team definitely needing a nice influx of rookies to add to this defense, but again, you're probably going to spend your first round pick on wide receiver because that has got to be a priority. The next issue I have with this team is going to be just the general depth on this roster. If you take away the starters and you start looking at the backups, there's a lot more questions and answers on basically every position, maybe besides cornerback and edge rusher, but even then, neither one of those positions are necessarily strengths on this roster. Your three starting rotational defensive edge rushers are going to be Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, and AJ Epinesa. And Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa are definitely capable, but obviously I've made my fair share of complaints on Von Miller, but that group in general just does not inspire me. And then your cornerbacks are going to be Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford, and Taron Johnson, and potentially Khair Elam if he can get things going. But again, outside of those guys, I have a ton of question marks. Granted, yes, you do have some young guys in each position who maybe could develop to become good, but still, regardless, depth is a huge question for a ton of positions on this roster. The last thing I have a big issue with is going to be, I think they have some questionable coaching. Not necessarily with the general direction of the roster, because I think they're doing the right things, but with what's actually going on the field. Last year, they had to fire their offensive coordinator to fix a lot of their problems offensively, so I want to see if next year, those fixed problems that they had last year that ended up turning pretty good for them as the season went on, if that will continue into next year. Especially with this roster being much worse, I think the coaching has to elevate their game to get this team to where they want to be. Because in my opinion, with a good draft class, this is a team that, if coaching is good, this team can still make a run to have a deep playoff run. Again, with Josh Allen, James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, and a bunch of stars offensively, you always are going to have a chance. But now this is really an opportunity for the coaching staff to really flex their muscles, especially with a rougher roster. But now let's start talking about the mock drafts. Again, I did 3 mock drafts, each of them being 4 rounds. So they had the 28th overall pick, the 60th overall pick, pick 128, and pick 133. I'm going to go through each one pretty quickly so I don't take up too much of your time, just give you guys a general idea of what I'm going for. With my first mock draft, my first pick was Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, a true wide receiver 1 who's very good at route running. I think he'll be a nice complement next to Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel. Round 2, I took Adisa Isaac to be a rotational upside defensive edge rusher. When you have Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa, who are likely going to be your 2 edge rushers of the future, getting a guy like an Adisa Isaac who has a tremendous ton of upside, I think would be a nice fit along this defensive line. Then I added in Cole Bishop, who's going to be playing at the safety position, came from Utah, somebody who I don't imagine is going to be starting next year, but given the fact of Mike Edwards being the starter, he might be able to fill in at that spot. And then lastly, I decided to pick up Josh Newton. At this point in the 4th round, I wasn't really able to find anyone of value who could fit in at a position of need, so I decided to go with the highest upside corner on the board to add alongside a lot of these decent cornerbacks that you have who maybe could potentially become something at some point. Then with my second mock draft, I tried my best not to pick the exact same players in each mock draft, so each player, I have different names, so you guys kind of get a general idea of what I'm going for. In my second mock draft, I had Adonai Mitchell again available, but this time I decided to take a taller wide receiver in Troy Franklin. He's a lot more like Gabe Davis, so I think he could be a better version of what Gabe Davis is in the NFL, which I think would be a nice combination, or sorry, a nice fit for Josh Allen. With my second round pick, I took Jaden Hicks, the safety out of Washington State, somebody who's a physical tackler, can come down in the box and make plays, but also has good upside as a good free safety option as well. I think he's better suited at the strong safety position so that he can come down and play more in the box, but I also wouldn't hate it if at some point he does try out the free safety spot as well. Then I took the best edge rusher that was available with my 4th round pick in Muhammad Kamara. Similar line of thought with the original pick of Adisa Isaac, a upside edge rusher who could add some depth bodies in that edge rushing department. And then lastly, with my 4th round pick, I wanted to add a depth option in the interior defensive line with McKinley Jackson. I was not too impressed with his draft combine performance, but given the fact that he was available, I wanted to go ahead and take him because I think he was the highest upside player when I took him in the draft. Lastly, with my 3rd round mock, none of the wide receivers who I really wanted were available. This was a situation where both Brian Thomas and Adonai Mitchell and Troy Franklin were taken before me, so that meant somebody did fall in my lap, and that happened to be Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. I know Connor McGovern and David Edwards and Will Clapp seem to be a small term answer to figure out that interior offensive line, but Jackson Powers Johnson to me is a fantastic prospect and is a dominating run blocker, which I think could open up a lot of things for this Buffalo Bills offense. He's also somebody who provides versatility where you don't necessarily have to play him at center, you can also play him at guard. Again, this was a situation where none of the receivers were really available for me, so I just took the best prospect in a position of need. Then with my second round pick, for some reason, Keon Coleman fell to me. In all likelihood, he is not going to be a late second round pick, but I also wouldn't be shocked. So I decided to take Keon Coleman as a high upside, big body wide receiver who's not afraid to make contested catches. Very strong hands, needs to work on his route running and some explosivity problems, but overall, I think he could be a fun playmaker next to what you already have there. He's also a very good complement because he's not short. He's a very tall, big body guy. Then with my fourth round pick, I took Bo Braid, a playmaking safety out of Maryland. He's somebody who, again, is a plug and play starter, but I think as time could develop to become a better player. He needs to work on a lot of different small attributes of his game, but again, this was a situation where I did have other guys like Cole Bishop and Mo Kamara available, but I wanted to take somebody different. Lastly, with my fourth round pick, I was very happy to see this guy available, Mekhi Wingo. He had a very good scouting combine. He's going to be playing in that interior defensive lineman yet again. He's somebody who I think could fill in to be more of a pass rushing option, whereas a guy like McKinley Jackson's more of a run stuffer. If a guy like a Mekhi Wingo happens to be available with your fourth round pick, he'd be a nice complement and rotational piece for a guy like Ed Oliver. But those are my 3 mock drafts. I want to know in the comment section below who you guys want the Buffalo Bills to take, and just let me know your general thoughts about the direction of the Buffalo Bills. Again, losing Stefon Diggs sucks, but it was a necessary evil. I think this team is heading in the right direction. Have an off year next year potentially, figure it out with this year's draft, figure it out with next year's draft, and come back bigger and stronger, not next year, but the year after. But if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.